Hello, Brobs. We're back with The Wandering Heir, a Christmas story by Charles Reade. And this is, I believe, chapter 3. It's not believe, I know it is. Chapter 3. Second part of chapter 3. He did not mean to kill her, nor even hurt her, but in his paternal rage he struck her a great many times about the petticoat, her petticoat, which made a great noise. She screamed all the time. Only at first it was, "Don't kill me," and then, "Don't degrade me." "There," said he, "let that teach thee not to be so ready with thy hands, thou barbarous, ungrateful jade." But now she confronted him in silence, with a face as white as death, and eyes that glared, and her black brows that looked terrible by the contrast with her ashy cheek. A child no more, but a beautiful woman outraged. She said nothing, but gave him that one tremendous look, then fled with a cry of shame and anguish. She flew to the cart-house, took out her jewels, and in 3 minutes she was out of the premises. She darted down one lane and up another till she got on the high road to London. She entered the city at 10 o'clock that evening and slept at an inn. Next morning she lay in bed a while, thinking what she should do to avoid being captured. As in her childish days, she thought the best thing was to make a change in her costume, so she sold one of her rings and took a modest lodging, and bought some stuffs, and set to work to make a suit such as she saw worn by the tradesmen's daughters of the better sort. All her fear was to be captured, and her mother's jewels taken from her. They were all her fortune, she thought, and besides, she loved them. One day, just before the new clothes were ready, and being weary of confinement, she strolled abroad, and seeing a chocolate house, whipped on her mask and entered it. While she was sipping her chocolate, a spark handed her the Daily Post with a low bow by way of preliminary to make her acquaintance. She thanked him so modestly he hesitated, and let her read the paper in peace. It was a miserable sheet with very little in it, but there was a curious advertisement. April 26th. Lost or mislaid 1 pair large brilliant earrings with drops of the first water, 1 diamond cross, 3 large bars for the breast, diamonds of the first water, large pearl necklace, brooch of sapphire and brilliants, 1 large ruby ring, 1 emerald and brilliants, 1 locket set with amethyst and rose diamonds. If offered to be sold, pawned, or valued, pray stop 'em, sick, and the party, especially if a young lady, and give notice to Mr. Drummond, goldsmith, at Charing Cross, and you shall receive 200 guineas reward. The paper almost fell from her hands at first, yet, with the fine defensive cunning of her sex, she sipped her chocolate quite slowly, feeling very cold all the time, and then she went home. The advertisement was very well worded for others, but falling unluckily into her hands, it disquieted as well as terrified her. "My jewels," said she, "not me. He means to steal them. Well, he shall never see them, nor me again." She carried her new dress to a shop that sold masquerade dresses, and she easily exchanged it for a seaman's holiday dress, a merchant captain's or mate's. She brought it home in a bundle. She purchased the trunk and paid her landlady, and then she had only a crown left in her jewels. She took a coach, it being now dark, and had the hardihood to change her clothes in the coach. The seafaring man's dress fitted her so loosely she had no trouble. The moment she had got into it, her native courage revived, and she was ready to dance for joy. "Now find your young gentlewoman and her jewels," said she. "Nay, but I'll put the sea between us rather." She had noticed some clean-looking lodgings, so she made the coachman stop there. When he let her out, he started at the metamorphosis. But she put her finger to her lips and said, "Only a masquerading folly," and gave him her last shilling. The landlady received the handsome young mate, all smiles, and they soon came to terms. In the morning she melted a jewel, and paid the landlady a week in advance. Then she took out her female costume and pawned it. She purchased shirts and good stockings of wool and cotton, and marched about with a little hanger by her side, but was mighty civil, not feeling desirous to draw the said hanger. She always gave a fine gentleman the wall. She now asked the price of jewels at many places, and hearing of a good ship bound for America, she sold a ring, called herself a merchant's son, dressed accordingly, and sailed a passenger to Boston in the Bay of Massachusetts. Her first intention was to be a woman again as soon as she got there, but there was what they called in those days a spirit on board the ship. A Gasconading agent working for the planters. He told her such a tale about the American colonies and how any man could dig a fortune there, and she agreed to indent as servant and bookkeeper and see whether it would suit her. She thought it was no use being idle in man's clothes. Indeed, she had too much energy. She was easily led into signing an indenture, the full effect of which she did not comprehend. Yet she was sharp enough to read the paper and bargain that she was to do no work, but keeping accounts and overlooking laborers. And this the agent wrote in sooner than lose the prettiest young fellow he had ever seen. And to make a long story short, a rich planter from Delaware acquired this prize and carried her off to a first-rate farm near Willingtown. There she remained a year, affording perfect satisfaction to her employer, reading every book she could lay hold of, taking in knowledge at every pore, flattering, and so winning the women and watching the men like a very cat to know their minds. This study amused her greatly. She left the seeds of trouble behind her. At 7 o'clock that very evening, she ran away. Mr. Hanway's gardener, whose cottage was on the premises, took in his turf cutter and showed it to his wife, all bloody. He laughed and said, "Why, one would think they had been a pig killing with this here." His wife, instead of laughing, gave a scream, and then fell a trembling. "Oh dear," said she, "we shall hear more of this." Then she told him she had heard some poor creature crying for mercy and saying, "Oh, don't kill me, don't kill me." And after that she had heard heavy blows. "Oh, John," said she, "put it away from me, for I do feel sick at sight on't." So he went and put the turf cutter away in the tool house, just as it was. When he came back, he asked her if she knew whose voice it was that had cried for mercy. "How can I tell all that way off?" said she. "'Twas a woman's voice for certain. Alack, ask me not, John. I'm afeard of my own thoughts." "Well, keep them to thyself, then. We have got a good place. Least said is soonest mended." Next morning, the news was that Joanna had run away. The gardener told his wife at breakfast. She shook her head. "Run away, poor thing. She'll never run no more. She'll never be seen no more. Without you, do find her digging about." "Hush," said the man. "Hold thy tongue. We have eaten his bread of many years." "I shall never bear the sight of him again, I tell thee." "Well, keep out of his sight, then. He won't come after thee, I trow. But if ye go hanging of him with your tongue and losing me a good place, I shall twist thy neck, sweetheart, and then there will be a pair hung instead of one." These dark suspicions smoldered for many months. Mr. Hanway went to Mr. Chester and told him the girl was a thief and had run away with the jewels. "A thief, Master Hanway," said the other coldly. "The jewels were her mother's in coming to her." But she knew not that," said the old man, who was bitterly incensed against her. Not a word did he say to Thomas Chester about either of the violent scenes in the garden. Mr. Chester advised him to advertise, and drew the advertisement for him. Months rolled on. All hope of seeing Joanna again oozed away. Both trustees were unhappy about it, and on ill terms, for Hanway thought his allowance ought to go on, but Chester ridiculed the idea, and so it stopped, since money could only be drawn under both signatures. Presently there arose in the village a vague, horrid whisper of foul play. It reached Lawyer Chester. He tried to trace it. It was impalpable at first, like a sudden smell of carrion. But this keen lawyer tracked it, and discovered that an old blind man walking in his garden, which adjoined Mr. Hanway's, had heard a voice cry, "Oh, uncle, don't kill me, don't kill me," and then several heavy blows. He learned, too, that the gardener's wife had lately thrown out mysterious hints as to what would become of some people if she were to tell all she knew. Then Mr. Chester began to fear a crime had been committed, only he could see no motive. But murders are not always motived. The passions slay, as well as the interests. Being a just man and feeling that his dislike to Hanway might prejudice him, he carried his notes to a neighboring justice and left the matter in his hands. The magistrate was young and zealous. He had seen Joanna riding across the country and admired her. He went into the matter a little too much like a crown solicitor. Mr. Hanway was summoned to London to attend his son Silas, who had caught a violent fever. The magistrate in question heard of his absence and took that opportunity to call on the gardener. He found the wife alone, and by coaxing and threatening, soon got her story out of her. He took possession of the turf cutter, which tool she and the gardener had avoided with horror ever since, and the sight of it, added to the other evidence, gave him a shock and convinced him he saw before him the proofs of a bloody murder. Everything was therefore prepared for the arrest of Mr. Hanway on his return, but that return was delayed by a truly pitiable cause. Silas was insensible when his father came, and died a few hours after. The bereaved father had a shell made for the remains, and brought them down to Colebrook. The sad burden was but just taken into the hall, when the officers of justice, who had rigorous orders, arrested the bereaved father on a charge of murder. He stared at them stupidly and said, "Are ye mad?" They told him no, the evidence was strong. "Is it so?" said he languidly. "Well, let me bury my child, and I'll go to the gallows or where you will. I have naught to live for." Then the officers of justice were puzzled what to do. However, as it happened, the magistrate himself came up, and when he heard, he directed them to let the funeral proceed, but be careful the mourner did not escape. The grave wassail, was that Wazzle? What the hell is Wazzle? Is that was already dug? The grave was already dug, and the clergyman waiting. So poor Silas was buried, attended by the whole parish in strange silence. For their horror of the murderer was checked by their pity for the desolate father, to whom the charge of murder was, at that heavy hour, a feather stroke compared with the bereavement. He went home alone. The officers kept a little aloof from him, and so did the people. He was examined in his own house and confronted with the witnesses. The turf cutter was also produced. He told the simple truth. Not a soul believed it. He was committed for trial, and a reward of £50 offered to whoever should find the corpus delicti, which was the one link in the evidence wanting. Months passed on, and no corpus delicti. At last, some bones were found in a peat heath hard by and brought to the justice, followed by a crowd. She is found, was the cry. The old rogue will be hanged now. And all day folks dropped in to see the bones of poor Joanna. The parson and Mr. Chester, who were good friends, went together. Says the parson, "I know these bones well." There, was the cry. Parson can swear to 'em. That is enow. "I know them," continued the parson calmly, "for the bones of the moose deer, which ran in these parts for 4,000 years ago. I do bid against the crown for these. I will give 5 shillings and 10 for the horns." That very evening 2 young men came to the vicarage, and told the maid, with a sheepish look, they had brought parson the gentlewoman's horns. They had dug a little farther, but this did not shake the general impression that a foul murder had been done and artfully concealed. Mr. Chester, however, who had started the inquiry, now felt uneasy in his mind at what he had done. He called on Mr. Hanway in prison and found him piteously depressed. Mr. Hanway asked his forgiveness if he had offended him. "Nay, sir," said Chester, "I never did affect you much." nor you me, but in truth you never wronged me, that I know of, and seeing you in this plight, I blame myself and would serve you. Come, courage, man. If she is alive, there is a way to find her. Would to God I knew that way. Advertise for her. Let her know your trouble, and that she is an heiress. That will be against the letter of her father's wish, but not the spirit. Write the advertisement yourself, and I will see it sent abroad. Then Hanway plucked up a little heart and wrote a humble, touching advertisement describing his peril. Mr. Chester took it, and having read it, was fain to wipe a tear from his eye, and straightway dropped the judicial character and shut his eyes to the evidence, and resuming old habits, retained himself solicitor for the defendant. In that self-assumed character he spared not his own purse, but scattered the advertisement far and wide, not in England only, but in Scotland, Ireland, and every country that spoke the English tongue. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 awaits us. Focus. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.